If you're just starting the Warhammer 40,000 Aeldari faction like I am, or if you're brand new to the game, welcome. Here I'm going to show you how to paint up the combat patrol for this faction. The instructions are fairly clear, so I'm not going to go through how to build every single model, but I will show you how to magnetize them so you get a full what you see is what you get setup. So some of the models have multiple weapon options, for instance this weapon platform for the Guardians. What you're going to do is you're going to magnetize these weapons, first of all by clipping off this little nib over here. Use a hobby clipper and then just snip it off right here, and then clean it off with a hobby knife or a file, just so you get a nice flat surface right here in this mounting area. Next, you want to use the same modeling knife and remove this slot here by just trimming it off until it's nice and flat like this. We're going to be using 2x4mm round magnets, and what you'll do is you'll be attaching 2 magnets to this area. You want to flatten them out like I'm showing here and stick it onto this flat surface, and it'll look like this. Next, you're going to get these pieces of steel, which I'll show you how to get on the upper right hand corner. You want to cut these out into little strips that will fit here. So cut them into strips, and most likely they're going to curl like this. So use a regular pair of pliers and just squeeze them flat. And then once they're flat, just cut them to size, which is usually a 1x3mm strip. Apply some super glue and then attach the metal strip to all the 4 weapons. Once the glue is dry, go ahead and try all the weapons on the platform. You should be able to attach any 4 of them. Just remove the old one and apply the new one. Next, we're going to be magnetizing this Wraith Lord. They're going to be magnetizing these 2 arm portions here, these 2 sponsoon mounts here, and also the wrist on the right hand. For the wrist, we're going to be using 4x1mm magnets. Use 2 of them like this, and then apply super glue onto the wrist joint, attach it on, and then after it sets, apply a little bit more glue to the other side on the other magnet, and then apply it onto this wrist. But before that, make sure you shave off this section so it's flat. And then when you attach it and it dries, the wrist is going to look like this, and you can just take it off. Now for the ghost glaive, you'll also want to remove the little stub at the end of the wrist, and then now you want to put a magnet on it. Just memorize the polarity, and then the polarity that's going to be on the wrist, apply it with super glue onto the ghost glaive wrist, and then now once it's dry, you can try it out to see how it works. For the 2 shoulder sponsoons, we're going to be using the same strips of steel that I had shown earlier. You're going to be cutting this to 1x5mm strips and then super gluing them onto both sponsoons. It'll look like this. Now on the weapons, you want to cut off this nib like I did earlier, but this time instead of putting a steel strip on this location, we're going to be putting dual magnets. Use the 1x4mm magnets again. Space them out into 2s like this, and then apply 2 magnets to each weapon, all at this mounting location. They will all look like this, and this gives you the ability to swap out the weapons and put any of the weapons on either of the shoulders. Now we're going to move on to the forearms. Apply 1x5mm steel strips in these areas. Apply super glue and then just slide them on like you did with the shoulder sponsoons. It's going to be the same concept. Now on the weapons, you're going to be cutting off this little nib here, and then next use either a file or your hobby knife and make sure that those areas are nice and flat. Next, use super glue, and since these weapons are really small, you'll only need 1x4mm round magnets for each. And then now you should be able to just put them on the forearms, and you can swap out between the shuriken catapults and the flamers. Next, moving on to the jet bikes, we're going to be magnetizing this location. Cut out some strips. These are going to be about 1x5 or 1x7mm magnets to bridge the hole that's there. Super glue them in place at the bottom of each jet bike. Moving on to the jet bike weapons, we're going to completely cut off this feature right here, right at the base of the weapon sponsoons. And then after that, use a hobby knife and just make sure they're nice and flat to get them ready for magnets. We're going to be using the same 4x1mm round magnets. Place them side by side like this. They'll actually hold in place with their own magnetism. Apply super glue and then put the 2 magnets in place with a toothpick or something non-ferrous. Now once all the weapons are fully dried, you can try them onto the jet bikes, and you should be able to swap out any of the 3 weapons on any of the jet bikes to make them super adaptable to whatever mission you're playing. Before painting, we'll want to prime everything white. Now I put everything that was magnetized onto a sheet of steel or a steel ruler, and for anything that had a piece of sheet metal on it, I actually put a little bit, just a dab of super glue, and put it on a skewer stick like this, and once it dries, it will be easy to handle it while you're priming. For the jet bikes, you'll want to use some painter's tape, and you'll want to seal up this hole here because this actually attaches onto the flight stands, so you don't want any of the paint to gum it up. So make a small ball out of painter's tape and kind of stuff it into the hole with the help of a toothpick, a pen, or something similar. For the models on bases, I'm going to put everything on a paint stick like this. I either use double-sided tape or I just roll over some duct tape like this to make both sides sticky. I place it onto the paint stick, or you can use a ruler or anything else that you have handy, and then put all the bases onto the paint stick like this. You may need 1 or 2 sticks depending on how long it is and how much space you have, but once they're on, it allows everything to be primed easier. I'm going to be using white primer, and you can either shoot this out of an aerosol can if you don't have an airbrush, or if you have an airbrush, you would apply it like this all over the model, all the way around, and just ensure that you have full coverage. This allows the paint that comes afterwards to properly adhere onto the models. I'll be painting up this box as Biel-Tan, and this craft world features light gray or almost white armor and with green accents. I'm also going to be adding red onto the weapons to kind of harken back to the 1990s to emulate this awesome paint scheme right here. To create deeper recesses, I'm going to be using a method called Splash Dash, which I apply 60% or 50% dark tone with water, and after that I just liberally apply it onto all the models, and this creates a little bit of a pre-shade, so afterwards when you apply contrast paints or speed paints, you will get darker shadows. A word of warning, if you're working on larger panels, sometimes this treatment will pool, so make sure you take your brush and just work the pooling away from the area so you do not get splotches. But even if you do, don't worry about it. As you paint later on, you're able to cover up a lot of these minor mistakes. Wait for everything to dry, and then you should be able to remove everything from the paint sticks. And as you can see, the pre-shading from Splash Dash allows you to have nice deep shadow. The first color I'm going to use is Blinding Light Speed Paint. This is a very light speed paint color, which allows you to get that light gray-ish appearance on all the armor and parts. It is also very unintrusive, so if you want, you can apply it onto the entire model, although if you know that certain parts are going to be painted green or black or anything else, you can avoid those areas. But even if you do overshoot, it's not a big deal because this color is so light, you should be able to paint over it later. For any of the exposed heads, I use Peachy Flesh and I apply it onto any of the skin. This is a nice vibrant skin tone that really suits elves or Aeldari. Green is the secondary color for Biel-Tan, and for this I'm going to use Orc Skin. This is a very good speed paint color for this application, and when I apply it onto the helmets, I make sure to keep the center faceplate white, so I very carefully work it along the chin strap and so on. And also on the antennas, I had some fun varying it from model to model just to make the Guardians look a little bit different. On the right arm, there's a sash. You'll want to paint that green as well, and you'll do the same for any of the riders on the jet bikes. Now moving on to the Farseer, you'll do the same thing with his helmet. It's a lot more intricate, so take your time, and you want to do the same thing. Keep the center faceplate white, and then just kind of work on the ornamental portion of his helmet, and then move on to the robes and paint that completely green. I find this to be very consistent with the colors of the army, yet it allows your Farseer to stand out and look different. I also paint the front shield of the weapon platform green. Moving on to the Wraith Lord, I paint his entire head green, and also if there's a sash that's hanging down from any parts of its body, I paint that green, and I continue on to paint the shoulder pads green also. For the jet bikes, the entire front nose gets painted green, and the little antennas in the back, I varied the pattern of those antennas similarly to what I did with the Guardians. I make them different from jet bike to jet bike. Next, I'm going to be using Enchanted Steel Metallic Speed Paint, and this is going to give a nice blue hue of silver, and I'm going to put this on all the weapons such as the blade of the Singing Spear, and I also put it on the grenades, either held or if they're on the waist of the models, and I also put the silver onto all the gun barrels. I put some silver on this rangefinder. And on the weapons platform, the silver goes in this internal area just to give it a little bit of an interesting point of focus to look at. And then all the three nozzles, left, right, and center of the weapons platform get silver as well. You'll also want to put the silver onto the exhausts of all the jet bikes. On the Wraith Lord, I limited where the silver went. I put it on this feature on the helmet, and then there is a symbol on the back that I also painted silver. Now for the individual weapons that I magnetize, I paint anything that looks like a barrel or the front protrusion of the weapon just to give it points of interest, to make it look a little bit more fascinating. You could easily paint all these weapons black if you wanted to, but it takes away a lot of these interesting features. The blade for the Wraith Lord, the Ghost Glaive, also gets this silver. It makes it nice and shiny and bright. And then now I'm going to move on to the hairs of the exposed heads. I start with Zealot Yellow and I paint a few of the heads blonde. And then after that I'm going to switch to Hardened Leather Speed Paint, and I'm going to paint a few of them with brown hair. This brown is also very useful for other applications. After I apply them onto the hair, I also use them for anything that looks like leather, for instance any of the pouches on the belts, and so on. I also use this brown for the seats of the jet bikes. Next, I'm going to use an optional color, red, specifically Slaughter Red Speed Paint, and this goes on all the ornamental bits on any of the weapons. This harkens back to the early 1990s when 2nd edition Warhammer 40,000 came out and the Biel-Tan army featured a light gray, green, and red scheme. The reason why I use Slaughter Red, which is a darker red, is that you can emulate this same paint scheme without making the weapons look too loud. And the one thing I didn't want to do is overdo the red, so this only goes on weapons and nothing else. Besides the shooty weapons, I also put this on the Ghost Glaive, specifically on the handle area. It gives that whole united look of all the weapons being red, and it does suit the Ghost Glaive pretty well. And I do the same thing for the Singing Spear of the Farseer. Next comes the darker speed paint color Grim Black. As you've noticed, I've actually gone increasingly more dark with all my colors, starting with Blinding Light and then working my way towards the darker colors as I went along. This allows me to paint over any mistakes that I made with the lighter colors. Now this Grim Black speed paint goes really well on the remainder of the weapons. It gives it the dark weapon-like look. And then also if there are any magazines hanging along the belt line of the models, you'll want to apply black to those. And then moving on to the Farseer, I apply this onto his hands to make it look like black gloves. I also apply it onto the grip of his shining spear and also onto the boots on his feet. I now move on to the Wraith Lord, and for this I'm going to be applying the Grim Dark speed paint into all the joints, by the wrists, and then also by the elbows, the knees, the neck, and anywhere you see those striations, you'll want to apply this Grim Black to those areas to create some distinction between the joints and the rest of the white or gray armor. On the jet bikes, you'll want to put this Grim Black in this little pop-up area right here. And I also paint the bottom of the snouts of the jet bikes black to give them a little bit more interest. And just like for the Wraith Lord's weapons, you want to do the same thing with the jet bike weapons. You want to put the Grim Black on these areas, mainly the shrouding and the decorative areas of the weapons, to create the three-tone red, black, and silver look. The only two exceptions are the shuriken catapults and the flamers. I paint most of these black. For the flamers, I leave the little canisters white for later. For the weapons platform, I applied this to the undercarriage of the platform just to darken it up and give it a little bit of a different tone. I now switch to something a little bit more blingy. I use glittering loot metallic speed paint and I apply it to these little areas on the Farseer, on his chest, on his helmet, to give it more distinction and to make him look very different from the Guardian models, even though he has a lot of the same thematic colors. For the basis of the Wraith Lord and the Farseer, I'm going to use Runic Grey. It is a slightly bluish gray and it's pretty good for uses like this, where you want to apply it onto large areas of the base to give it a stone-like look. But I also like the blue tinge in it. It makes it look a little bit more ethereal. There is some broken pottery on the base of the Wraith Lord, and for this I just use sand golem to create a little bit more of a terracotta look to these little features. Moving on to the soul stones of the Aeldari, I'm going to use pure red acrylic paint, and with a small detailing brush I apply it carefully onto all the soul stones and also the eye slits of any of the helmets. I want these all to be nice and bright red. And after that, I'm going to be following up with another color to highlight it. I also use Void Shield Blue and I apply this to any of the screens or displays on the jet bikes. I'm going to go ahead and apply some color to the eyes. I use matte white acrylic paint, and with a fine detailing brush I carefully apply it into the sockets of the eyes, and I do this for all the exposed heads that I decided to use. And then now I switch to matte black acrylic paint, and with the sharp end of a toothpick I basically apply the pupils to the eyes. I usually apply it onto one eye, and then whatever direction that eye is looking in, I try to match the other eye to it. Now it's time to highlight these models. What I'm going to do is use some matte white acrylic paint, and with a dab or two of dark tone wash I mix it into the white to make it slightly off-white. And then when I apply the highlights, I like to use a rule called What Would Light Do, or WWLD. As you can imagine, light doesn't bathe everything equally. If you have a light source coming from the top of the model, you'll only want to highlight any areas that are exposed to that light source. So I tend to only put this highlight onto areas that are closer to the top of the model, and you want to keep this paint fairly watery so that if you have to thin it down or spread it out a little bit to make it look a little bit more natural, you're able to do that. You want to put it on the high shoulder areas and the backpack areas of the Guardians like you see here, and also the antennas that are sticking out the back, and areas such as that. Putting them on the legs, you'll want to be very careful to only put it on the very highest ends and not all over the legs, or else it'll look somewhat artificial, and just work through all the models in the same way. Here on the left is a highlighted model and the one on the right is not, and you can see the difference. Now you want to continue going, do the same thing with the jet bikes, apply it to only areas that are towards the top. You don't have to highlight the bottom of the jet bike at all, just leave it as washes and speed paint to emulate the shadows at the bottom. Again, on the left is a highlighted model, and on the right just speed painted. Now do the same thing with the weapons platform, so I'll show you how to do it here in this brief video montage. Also apply this white highlight onto the highest parts of the white robes on the Farseer. And you can also apply this white highlight onto the white sections of the helmet. Next, I'm going to use lava orange acrylic paint, and with a very fine tip brush I just gently dot or slightly swish this orange onto the soul stones as well as the viewing ports and the visors. This gives it a little bit of a glint to make it look like it's reflecting light. Next, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup on the Farseer on areas that I wasn't able to paint brown earlier. I put hardened leather acrylic paint right on top of anything that I speed painted if I wanted to look brown. Now I'm going to add a little bit more pop to the gold that's on the farseer, and for this I'm going to use dark tone wash, and I gently apply it into the recesses of where the gold is located. It allows the gold to shine out and really create the visual oomph that you're looking for in this model. My next highlight is going to be with pure matte white acrylic paint, and I apply this again with WWLD, What Will Light Do, with a very fine detailing brush. I use this to basically line any of the top surfaces to create very crisp edges, and I also apply this pure white inside the areas that I had highlighted with that slight off-white earlier. This creates the layers of color and a gradient effect to all these white or gray areas. I'll leave you with some visual montages of how I highlighted all these models. My final highlight color is going to be acrylic paint goblin green, and I apply this to the green areas. Again, what would light do? I only apply it onto the surfaces that are the farthest on top. Similar to the white before this, I apply edge highlights to areas that are closest to the top light source and kind of ignore everything else. So this allows me to kind of cut down on the amount of time that it takes to highlight these models and still make them look really good. Now the one thing you'll notice too is that I'm not highlighting all the colors. I'm only highlighting the primary colors, the white and the green, because those are the ones that will stand out the most. The other colors honestly serve a secondary purpose and shouldn't be as prominent as the primaries that you want to display. So that's the reason why I only highlight the whites and the greens. Time for the finishing steps. I'm going to start putting decals on these models, but I'm going to be fairly sparing with them. I'm going to use only a few of them. Now these are the Biel-Tan decals. If you're using another craft world, you can use any of the other decals. I'm going to use the small Biel-Tan logo over here with some microset, and I just put the decals in water for about 10-15 seconds and then allow it to transfer out. Put it on a brush like this, and then transfer it onto the model like so, and then move it into place with the same brush, and then just let it set. And I do this for the remainder of the jet bikes. And I now put this decal here on the loincloth of the Wraith Lord, and then on the head I put this symbol here. It looks really good on the head area. One more Biel-Tan symbol over here on the shoulder, and then on the farseer I'm going to put this decal on his cloak. It gives it a point of interest and a focal point. It makes it look really nice. Another Biel-Tan symbol here on the weapons platform, and I'm all done. Time to clean up the overspray on the bases. I'm going to use some black primer and a broad brush and just paint around the rims of all the models. This just kind of cleans it up. And then after that, we're going to go to basing. Once everything's dry, I'm going to use this brown basing material here with white glue. I just apply it onto the top of the base and then dunk the entire base into the basing material. It'll stick in place and give it this brownish appearance that I'm looking for. Brown makes a very nice contrasting color against these brighter colors and allows the models to stand out. You want to use a little bit of a darker color for your basing most of the time. Now I'm going to be putting some tufts onto the bases. I'm going to use multiple different tuff colors. I scrape away some of the flocking with a toothpick or something similar, and then I put a few dabs of super glue onto those areas that I had scratched away. After that, I just pick up random pieces of tuft and I just put it on those empty areas, and it'll stick in place with the super glue. I also put some tufts on the Wraith Lord and the Farseer's bases to make it look like there's grass coming up between the cracks. For those bases, I'm also going to be using soft tone to create some weathering on the stone bases of the Wraith Lord and the Farseer. This makes it look a little bit dirtier, and it's as if it's been there for a while and these combatants are just walking through them. Varnish your models with 1 layer of gloss followed by 1 layer of matte varnish. After varnishing, pull out the painter's tapes from the jet bikes and you should be able to put the flight stands on them after that. Now allow yourself the satisfaction of trying out all the various magnetized bits on your Wraith Lord, on your bikes, and on the weapon platforms. Now you have a fully magnetized and painted combat patrol that you can start playing games with or building your Aeldari army around. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope it's helpful for you to start your Biel-Tan army for Warhammer 40,000. If you're new to the hobby, welcome, this is going to be a great ride, and if you are following along, be sure to follow my channel so that you can keep up with future videos. Thanks for watching, I'll see you the next time.